Narcissists often possess a strong sense of entitlement, which distorts their perceptions of fairness, justice, and personal responsibility. This sense of entitlement is rooted in the belief that they are inherently deserving of special treatment, admiration, and privileges, regardless of their actions or the impact they have on others. They believe that the rules that apply to others should not apply to them because they see themselves as superior, more important, or more deserving. This inflated sense of self-worth leads them to make unreasonable demands and expect others to cater to their needs, often without regard for the feelings, needs, or rights of those around them. The narcissist's sense of entitlement is often the driving force behind their interactions with others. They might expect to be the center of attention in any given situation and become upset or angry if they do not receive the level of admiration or recognition they believe they are owed. For example, in social settings, they may dominate conversations, expecting everyone to listen to them and affirm their opinions, disregarding the input of others. If they don't receive the praise or acknowledgement they feel entitled to, they may react with disdain, frustration, or even passive-aggressive behavior, convinced that they have been slighted or overlooked. This sense of entitlement can extend to all areas of life, from personal relationships to professional environments, where they believe they deserve the best opportunities, the highest rewards, and the most recognition simply because of who they are. This entitlement often leads narcissists to manipulate others in order to get what they want. Because they believe they are deserving of special treatment, they are willing to take advantage of others to secure their desires without considering the impact their actions have on those around them. For example, they might exploit the goodwill of friends, family members, or colleagues, using charm, guilt, or even threats to get their needs met. They might manipulate situations to make themselves appear more deserving of praise or recognition, or they may use others as stepping stones to further their own ambitions. The narcissist views relationships as transactional, where they are the primary beneficiary and others exist to serve their needs. They may offer favors or acts of kindness, but only when it serves their self-interest, expecting something in return, often without acknowledging the sacrifices others make on their behalf. This sense of entitlement is not limited to interactions with others. It also extends to how the narcissist perceives the world around them. They often believe they should receive the best of everything, be it material possessions, recognition, or opportunities, simply because they believe they are more worthy than others. In professional settings, for example, a narcissist may believe they deserve promotions or accolades regardless of their actual performance, relying on their charisma or ability to manipulate others rather than earning recognition through hard work or skill. They might disregard the achievements of their colleagues, dismissing them as less significant or less important because they view their own contributions as superior. Their entitlement leads them to believe that they should always be the one to receive the rewards, and if they don't, they often feel betrayed or unjustly treated. The narcissist's sense of entitlement also extends to their expectations of how others should behave toward them. They may expect constant admiration and validation, believing that others should always recognize their greatness and cater to their emotional needs. If someone does not provide this validation, the narcissist may feel personally affronted, as though they have been wronged or disrespected. This sense of entitlement creates a cycle of dissatisfaction, as the narcissist continually seeks out praise and recognition, only to find that it never fully satisfies their insatiable desire for admiration. No matter how much attention they receive, it is never enough, and they will always expect more, demanding that others provide it at all costs. In personal relationships, this entitlement can be incredibly destructive. Narcissists often expect their partners to meet their emotional needs without reciprocating, believing that they are entitled to unconditional support, admiration, and love. They might expect their partner to sacrifice their own needs, desires, or well-being in order to cater to the narcissist's demands. If the partner fails to do so, the narcissist may respond with anger, criticism, or withdrawal, convinced that their entitlement has been violated. Narcissists are rarely capable of offering the same level of care or support in return, as they are more focused on their own needs and desires. The relationship becomes imbalanced, with the narcissist taking without giving, and over time, this imbalance leads to resentment, emotional exhaustion, and eventual breakdowns in the relationship. Moreover, narcissists often struggle with the idea of fairness and justice. They believe that they are above reproach, and that any criticism or challenge to their authority is an injustice. They may refuse to accept responsibility for their actions, instead blaming others or circumstances for their mistakes or shortcomings. This refusal to take responsibility is tied to their sense of entitlement, as they believe they are never at fault and that others should bear the consequences of their actions. If they are called out for poor behavior, they might react with defensiveness, denial, or even rage, seeing it as an attack on their perceived superiority, rather than an opportunity for growth or self-improvement. This sense of entitlement also leaves narcissists vulnerable to feelings of bitterness or resentment when they do not get what they believe they deserve. If they feel overlooked, underappreciated, or unfairly treated, they can become deeply upset, feeling as though the world is conspiring against them. They may harbor grudges, holding on to feelings of injustice and nurturing a sense of victimhood, which only reinforces their distorted worldview. They might then use these feelings of resentment as fuel to manipulate others or justify their self-centered behavior, all while reinforcing the belief that they are entitled to everything they want. Ultimately, the narcissist's sense of entitlement creates a toxic dynamic in their relationships and interactions with others. It drives their need for constant admiration, their exploitation of others, and their inability to recognize the rights and needs of those around them. This entitlement is both a shield and a sword, protecting them from confronting their own insecurities while simultaneously alienating others and reinforcing their destructive behaviors. It keeps them locked in a cycle of self-centeredness where they are perpetually dissatisfied, seeking more and more without ever feeling truly fulfilled or capable of genuine connection with others. Long-term consequences are something that a narcissist is often oblivious to, as they are more focused on immediate gratification and maintaining their inflated sense of self. Their ability to consider the broader implications of their actions is severely limited, primarily because they are trapped in a mindset that centers around their own desires and needs. Narcissists typically live in the present, seeking to preserve their self-image, gain admiration, and avoid discomfort with little regard for the future. This short-sightedness often leads them to make decisions that, while providing instant rewards, have lasting negative consequences, both for themselves and those around them. The narcissist's tendency to disregard long-term consequences is driven by an inability to think beyond their immediate emotional needs. They are often guided by impulse, prioritizing their own desires over rational thought or consideration for others. For example, they may engage in reckless behaviors such as indulging in excessive spending, seeking constant validation, or pushing people away because these actions provide an instant boost to their ego or self-worth. However, the repercussions of these actions, financial ruin, damaged relationships, or emotional exhaustion, are rarely acknowledged or even recognized by the narcissist until the damage has already been done. They often view the consequences of their behavior as irrelevant, or they blame external forces, convinced that they are victims of circumstance rather than responsible for their own actions. In relationships, this disregard for long-term consequences can be especially damaging. Narcissists frequently prioritize their own emotional needs at the expense of others. They may take advantage of others' generosity, manipulate situations to maintain control, or refuse to make sacrifices for the benefit of the relationship. In the short term, these behaviors might seem to work in their favor as they manage to get what they want. However, over time, the cumulative effects of their actions, such as the erosion of trust, emotional burnout, and resentment, create a toxic environment that is unsustainable. People close to a narcissist eventually recognize the pattern of exploitation and manipulation, and as trust deteriorates, the narcissist may find themselves increasingly isolated. Their failure to consider the long-term effects of their behavior ultimately results in the collapse of relationships they once valued, though they may not realize it until it is too late. Professionally, a narcissist's inability to recognize long-term consequences can have significant implications. Narcissists often make decisions based on their own desires for power, status, and recognition, without considering the potential effects on their colleagues, teams, or the larger organization. They may engage in unethical behavior, such as taking credit for others' work, undermining coworkers to climb the corporate ladder, or using manipulation to secure their own success. In the short term, this might seem to provide them with the recognition or advancement they seek, but it often comes at the cost of damaging relationships and creating a toxic work environment. Over time, colleagues begin to recognize the narcissist's manipulative behavior and may distance themselves, leading to professional isolation. Worse, the narcissist's actions might eventually come to light, resulting in professional consequences such as demotion, termination, or loss of reputation. The narcissist, however, will likely be blind to these outcomes until they reach a breaking point, often shifting the blame to others rather than acknowledging their role in the downfall. The narcissist's inability to consider long-term consequences also extends to their personal development. They are often caught in a cycle of self-aggrandizement, where their primary focus is on maintaining their image rather than engaging in the difficult work of self-reflection and growth. They may avoid confronting their weaknesses, dismiss feedback from others, and refuse to accept responsibility for their mistakes, all because doing so would disrupt their carefully constructed self-image. This inability to grow or mature emotionally can lead to stagnation, where the narcissist is unable to develop the coping mechanisms or emotional intelligence necessary for navigating life's challenges. Their behavior becomes more erratic, more self-serving, and more detached from reality, as they refuse to engage in the hard work required for personal transformation. As a result, they often find themselves in a perpetual state of dysfunction, unable to break free from their own destructive patterns. Even when confronted with the fallout of their actions, narcissists tend to focus only on the immediate consequences rather than the larger, long-term picture. If they experience a temporary setback, such as a breakup, a loss of status, or a professional failure, they may react with anger or defensiveness, but they rarely take the time to reflect on how their behavior led to these outcomes. Instead, they might blame others for their misfortune, creating an external narrative that absolves them of responsibility. This lack of insight into the long-term consequences of their behavior prevents them from learning and evolving. They remain locked in a cycle of immediate gratification and self-justification, unable to see the long-term repercussions of their actions until the damage is irreversible. Furthermore, the narcissist's failure to consider long-term consequences often exacerbates their underlying sense of emptiness and insecurity. While they may chase short-term validation, success, or admiration, they are ultimately left feeling unfulfilled because these superficial rewards are fleeting. The emptiness that they try to fill with external praise or status is never truly satisfied, leading them to constantly seek more. However, because they fail to build meaningful relationships or engage in genuine self-reflection, they find themselves increasingly isolated and disconnected. This emotional void becomes more pronounced as the narcissist ages and the consequences of their past actions accumulate. Yet rather than confronting this void or understanding the root cause of their dissatisfaction, they continue to pursue external validation in a desperate attempt to fill the gap, unaware that it will never bring lasting fulfillment. In the end, the narcissist's disregard for long-term consequences is one of the key factors that traps them in a cycle of self-destructive behavior. By focusing only on immediate rewards and ignoring the broader impact of their actions, they create a path of personal and relational ruin that often cannot be undone. The inability to reflect on the future, combined with a refusal to change course when necessary, prevents them from developing a sense of fulfillment, stability, or emotional depth, leaving them isolated and perpetually seeking external validation that ultimately fails to provide true satisfaction. Vulnerability is one of the most fundamental aspects of being human, but for a narcissist, it represents a significant threat. The very nature of narcissism revolves around the need to protect oneself from feelings of weakness, inadequacy, or failure. A narcissist at their core is terrified of exposing their vulnerabilities because doing so would shatter the carefully constructed image of perfection they so desperately cling to. Vulnerability for them is synonymous with failure, and failure is unacceptable. This fear is not just a passing insecurity, it's deeply ingrained in their psyche, governing much of their behavior and interactions with others. Narcissists avoid vulnerability at all costs because it forces them to confront their imperfections and acknowledge their human limitations. If they were to admit vulnerability, it would mean acknowledging that they are not superior, that they are not infallible, and that they too are subject to the same flaws and uncertainties as everyone else. For someone whose identity is built on a grandiose self-image, the thought of showing weakness or emotional openness is anathema. It is a direct challenge to their need to be seen as exceptional, powerful, or perfect. This fear of vulnerability leads them to adopt a defensive, often hostile stance where any sign of imperfection is quickly buried beneath a mask of arrogance and superiority. This avoidance of vulnerability manifests in a number of ways. For one, narcissists often refuse to admit when they are wrong because doing so would require them to acknowledge that they are not flawless. They might become defensive, aggressive, or even rage-filled when confronted with their mistake. Rather than accepting responsibility, they will blame others, distort reality, or even lie to protect their image. Admitting fault is too great a risk because it would expose them as human, and the narcissist cannot tolerate the thought of being perceived as anything less than perfect. In their minds, vulnerability equals defeat, and defeat is something they simply cannot afford to entertain. In relationships, the fear of vulnerability is often at its most damaging. Narcissists struggle to be emotionally open with others because doing so would require them to trust someone enough to expose their insecurities and fears. Trust for a narcissist is a difficult concept. They are constantly guarded, unsure of whether others will truly understand them or use their vulnerabilities against them. Because of this, they rarely allow themselves to be truly seen. Instead, they create a facade of invulnerability, projecting an image of strength and self-sufficiency. They might appear emotionally distant, cold, or detached, often pushing others away rather than allowing themselves to be vulnerable with them. This emotional distance prevents them from forming deep, authentic connections, as vulnerability is the cornerstone of intimacy and trust in any relationship. When it comes to romantic relationships, this fear of vulnerability can be especially toxic. Narcissists often seek out relationships not as a means of emotional connection, but rather to reinforce their sense of self-worth. They may view their partner as an object to be admired or a source of validation rather than as an individual with their own emotional needs. Because they fear vulnerability, they avoid sharing their true selves with their partner. They may withhold their feelings, avoid discussing their insecurities, or even refuse to open up about their past. Instead of seeking mutual emotional support, they look for admiration and adoration from their partner, expecting to be idealized and placed on a pedestal. Any attempt by their partner to engage in deeper emotional exchanges or to show their own vulnerability may be met with dismissal or criticism, as the narcissist simply cannot relate to the concept of being emotionally exposed. In more extreme cases, a narcissist might manipulate their partner into feeling guilty for expressing vulnerability. They may belittle or criticize the other person's emotional needs, accusing them of being weak, overly sensitive, or needy. This serves to reinforce the narcissist's own emotional distance as they continue to avoid confronting their own vulnerabilities while invalidating the emotional experiences of those around them. Over time, this creates a dynamic where the narcissist partner feels unsupported, emotionally drained, and isolated. The narcissist, meanwhile, remains trapped in their own cycle of self-protection, unable to engage in the vulnerable, reciprocal emotional exchange that is necessary for a healthy relationship. In professional settings, the narcissist's fear of vulnerability can be equally damaging. They might avoid admitting when they don't know something or are unsure about a particular task because doing so would expose a weakness. This leads to a tendency to overcompensate by taking on more than they can handle or by pretending to have all the answers even when they don't. In meetings or team settings, a narcissist might dominate the conversation, shutting down others' ideas and contributions, as this serves to protect their sense of superiority and control. Vulnerability in the workplace is seen as a sign of incompetence, and so they often operate in a way that stifles open communication and collaboration. Their inability to ask for help, express uncertainty, or admit when they are wrong can lead to poor decision-making, unnecessary conflicts, and a lack of trust among colleagues. Ultimately, the narcissist's avoidance of vulnerability prevents them from growing emotionally, socially, or professionally. Growth requires the ability to confront one's own imperfections and to be open to learning from one's mistakes. But the narcissist, caught in the cycle of self-deception and fear of exposure, cannot allow themselves to engage in this process. They remain locked in a state of emotional immaturity, unable to form deep, meaningful relationships or to develop the self-awareness required to make positive changes in their lives. By rejecting vulnerability, they also reject the potential for true connection with others and the possibility of personal growth. Empathy is one of the most essential qualities for understanding and connecting with others, yet for a narcissist, it is often either completely absent or severely diminished. Narcissists, by definition, are primarily concerned with themselves and their own needs, and this self-centeredness makes it extremely difficult for them to truly connect with others on an emotional level. While they might mimic empathy or display it when it benefits them, their capacity to truly understand or share in the emotional experiences of others is often absent. This lack of empathy is not just a minor flaw in their character, it is a deep, ingrained aspect of their psychology that shapes how they interact with the world. For a narcissist, emotions, both their own and others, are seen as tools to manipulate or control situations rather than as genuine sources of connection or understanding. Their emotional landscape is dominated by their need for validation, admiration, and power, and they view everything through the lens of how it impacts their self-emotion. They may recognize that others have emotions, but they typically do not relate to those emotions in a way that allows for true understanding. Instead, they might treat the emotions of others as inconsequential or even as a threat to their own position. If someone is upset, a narcissist might see this as an opportunity to either exploit the situation for sympathy or to dismiss the person's feelings as unimportant or unjustified. The narcissist's inability to empathize is rooted in their inability to see others as fully realized individuals with their own thoughts, feelings, and experiences. In the narcissist world, people exist primarily as extensions of their own needs. If someone does not contribute to the narcissist's goals or boost their ego, they may be dismissed, ignored, or even devalued. This lack of regard for others' emotional states can manifest in a variety of ways, from inconsiderate behavior to outright cruelty. Narcissists may make callous remarks or behave in ways that are emotionally hurtful simply because they do not recognize or care about the pain they are causing. In relationships, this lack of empathy is particularly damaging. Narcissists struggle to understand the emotional needs of their partners, friends, and family. They might be unaware of or unconcerned with the subtle cues that others give about their feelings. For instance, if a partner is feeling neglected or hurt, a narcissist may not notice or may disregard their concerns entirely. They might view the other person's emotional distress as an inconvenience or a disruption to their own needs. In more extreme cases, narcissists might gaslight others, manipulating them into questioning their own emotions or sanity, just to maintain control over the narrative of the relationship. Even when a narcissist does seem to show empathy, it is often superficial or strategically motivated. They may engage in acts of kindness or show concern for others, but these actions are usually done with the expectation of receiving something in return, whether it's admiration, validation, or some other form of benefit. The narcissist's empathy is not rooted in a genuine desire to understand or care for the other person, but rather in the need to reinforce their own sense of importance and control. They may use empathy as a tool to manipulate others into doing what they want, or to paint themselves as compassionate and understanding, when in reality, their actions are motivated by self-interest. The lack of empathy also affects the narcissist's ability to form deep, meaningful connection. Human relationships are built on mutual understanding, respect, and the ability to emotionally support one another. Without empathy, a narcissist is unable to offer true emotional support or engage in reciprocal emotional exchanges. They might appear charming and charismatic at first, but over time, those around them begin to realize that the narcissist cannot truly see them or connect with them in an authentic way. The narcissist may be able to engage in surface-level interactions, but they are unable to offer the kind of emotional depth that forms the foundation of close relationships. This often leads to a sense of isolation for those involved with the narcissist, as they feel emotionally disconnected or unseen. In professional settings, the narcissist's lack of empathy can create toxic dynamics. They may disregard the needs and concerns of their colleagues, viewing others primarily as tools to help them achieve their personal ambitions. They might belittle, undermine, or exploit those around them, seeing their coworkers not as collaborators, but as competitors or obstacles. This lack of empathy can erode trust and create an environment of fear and resentment. Narcissists are often unable to work effectively in teams because they cannot understand or value the perspectives of others. They might take credit for group accomplishments while disregarding the contributions of those around them. This can lead to resentment and a lack of cooperation, ultimately hindering the success of the entire team. The narcissist's lack of empathy is not only an obstacle to their own personal growth, but also a significant barrier to their relationships with others. It prevents them from developing the emotional intelligence necessary for meaningful connections and impedes their ability to engage in healthy, reciprocal relationships. Their inability to empathize creates a world where everything revolves around their own needs, leaving others feeling empty, unsupported, or even emotionally drained. Over time, the narcissist's inability to understand or relate to the emotions of others can result in a series of failed relationships, both personal and professional. As they continue to ignore the emotional lives of those around them, they are left in a cycle of superficial interactions that ultimately leave them isolated and unfulfilled. Self-awareness is a fundamental aspect of human growth and psychological health, but it is something a narcissist utterly lacks. At the core of narcissism lies a profound disconnection from one's true self. Narcissists are unable to recognize their own flaws, insecurities, or limitations because they are continuously consumed by a distorted self-image. Their self-concept is constructed on the premise of being superior, infallible, and deserving of admiration. This construct, while providing temporary relief from the anxiety of self-doubt, leaves no room for the kind of self-reflection necessary to understand one's deeper motivations, desires, and flaws. When a narcissist looks inward, what they see is not an honest reflection of who they truly are, but rather a carefully curated version of themselves that conforms to their idealized image. They project a persona that is not authentic, but designed to elicit admiration and affirmation from others. This idealized self, simeg, is often inflated and unrealistic, built on the desire to be seen as perfect, powerful, or exceptional. The narcissist's perception of themselves is largely detached from reality, creating a sense of self that is both fragile and rigid. Any threat to this image, whether through criticism, failure, or vulnerability, triggers defensive mechanisms that block any opportunity for genuine self-awarenessness. This lack of self-awareness is particularly dangerous because it prevents the narcissist from acknowledging their own destructive behaviors and patterns. They are often completely blind to the harm they cause others, whether through manipulation, neglect, or emotional abuse. In relationships, for example, a narcissist might be unaware of how their actions affect those around them. They might not recognize that their demands for constant admiration are draining, or that their lack of empathy creates emotional distance. Because they are not in touch with their own emotional world. They cannot understand or empathize with the emotional needs of others. This inability to engage with their own emotions means that narcissists often lack the capacity for genuine connection with other people. They are disconnected from the full range of human experience, seeing only what serves to bolster their sense of self-importance. Self-awareness also involves a deep understanding of one's weaknesses and vulnerabilities. But for a narcissist, this is anathema. Admitting flaws or mistakes feels like an existential threat to their self-worth, and so they evade it at all costs. They are perpetually locked in a cycle of self-deception, telling themselves that they are perfect or that they are above reproach. This self-deception often extends to the point where the narcissist is unable to see the negative consequences of their actions. They might hurt others, make poor decisions, or act in ways that ultimately undermine their own goals, all without recognizing their role in the unfolding disaster. For the narcissist, reality becomes a series of distortions that align with their self-serving worldview, leaving little room for the truth. This lack of self-awareness also affects the narcissist's ability to grow or change. Without the capacity for introspection, they are unable to identify areas in their life that need improvement. They cannot reflect on past mistakes to avoid repeating them, and they lack the humility required for personal growth. Personal development requires the willingness to face one's limitations, to acknowledge where one has fallen short, and to make adjustments. But for the narcissist, any acknowledgement of imperfection is seen as a failure, a crack in the facade that they are determined to maintain at all costs. They refuse to engage in the kind of self-reflection that is necessary for real change, instead continuing to live in a state of denial. The absence of self-awareness also manifests in a failure to understand how their actions impact their surroundings. Narcissists are often so wrapped up in their own internal world that they have little to no regard for the consequences of their behavior on others. This lack of empathy further reinforces their inability to reflect on their actions. They might dominate conversations, belittle others, or manipulate situations without ever questioning whether their behavior is appropriate or fair. In their mind, the world revolves around them, and their needs and desires take precedence over everyone else's. The consequences of their actions are only significant if they directly affect their ability to maintain their desired self-image. In professional settings, narcissists often believe they are deserving of admiration, promotion, or success without recognizing the hard work or contributions of others. They might take credit for team accomplishments or undermine colleagues to position themselves as the central figure. Their lack of self-awareness prevents them from seeing how their behavior alienates others or damages their professional reputation. They are oblivious to how their actions can create toxic environments, leading to dissatisfaction and resentment among peers. Their inability to recognize their role in creating these outcomes leaves them trapped in a cycle of self-aggrandizement while others around them suffer the fallout. Perhaps the most painful aspect of the narcissist's lack of self-awareness is the emotional toll it takes on those who interact with them. Friends, family members, and colleagues may find themselves caught in a never-ending cycle of frustration as they try to explain how the narcissist's actions are harming others, only to be met with denial or defensiveness. The narcissist might dismiss concerns or misunderstand emotional feedback, causing others to feel unheard, invalidated, or even crazy. Over time, those around the narcissist may begin to doubt their own perceptions, questioning whether they are being too sensitive or overreacting. This creates a toxic dynamic in which the narcissist's inability to see themselves clearly distorts the reality of everyone around them. The lack of self-awareness that defines narcissism is not merely an inconvenience or a personality flaw. It is a fundamental barrier to personal development and healthy relationships. It locks the narcissist in a perpetual state of self-deception, leaving them disconnected from the truth of who they are and unable to evolve into a more authentic, self-aware version of themselves. You said, now imagine for a moment the mind of a narcissist. It's a complex, often fragile construct held together by self-deception and a distorted sense of superiority. Narcissism, as we all know, is the refuge of those who cannot face the vulnerability of their own inadequacy. It's a psychological armor, one that protects them from the raw, unfiltered reality of their own weaknesses. But what happens when you ask a narcissist the right questions they simply cannot answer? A narcissist's relationship with accountability is one of avoidance, deflection, and denial. At the core of narcissism is an overwhelming need to preserve a grandiose self-image, and accountability directly threatens that fragile construct. To hold oneself accountable is to admit mistakes, confront shortcomings, and accept responsibility for one's actions, all of which would expose the narcissist's insecurities and imperfections. The narcissist cannot and will not allow themselves to face these truths, as doing so would destabilize the sense of superiority that sustains them. Instead of taking responsibility, a narcissist will deflect blame onto others, external circumstances, or even abstract concepts like bad luck or fate. They will rarely, if ever, acknowledge their role in a situation where things go wrong. When they do, it is often in a way that minimizes their involvement or paints them as a victim of external forces. The idea of being at fault is something they cannot tolerate because it challenges their inflated self-concept. This is why narcissists tend to create a reality where they are always right, always justified, and always the center of attention, regardless of the facts. This pattern of deflection is so ingrained that it becomes automatic. If a narcissist is caught in a lie, they will rarely own up to it. Instead, they might twist the truth further or accuse the person pointing out the lie of being overly sensitive, delusional, or malicious. If someone challenges their actions, the narcissist will quickly launch into a defense, often attacking the character or intentions of the person holding them accountable rather than addressing the actual issue at hand. This is not just a strategy, it is a psychological survival mechanism. Acknowledging fault would shatter the self-possession of perfection they have so carefully crafted. Narcissists also possess a profound inability to learn from their mistakes, primarily because they do not see them as their own. If they encounter failure or conflict, it is rarely an opportunity for self-reflection. Instead, they will view it as something that happened to them, something outside their control. The failure is a result of someone else's incompetence, misunderstanding, or betrayal. Their capacity for self-examination is shallow, and they are incapable of honest self-criticism. Even if confronted with undeniable evidence of their wrongdoing, the narcissist will often react with indignation and defensiveness as they cannot comprehend how they could be wrong. One of the most striking aspects of a narcissist's avoidance of accountability is their constant need for admiration and validation. They seek praise not because they value it, but because it serves to shield them from the uncomfortable truth of their imperfection. They need others to affirm their sense of superiority, to maintain their fragile self-esteem. When they fail to receive this validation, they can react with disproportionate rage or emotional outbursts. They become highly sensitive to criticism, often perceiving it as a personal attack or an affront to their character, rather than as an opportunity for growth. In relationships, this lack of accountability can be devastating. The narcissist may manipulate situations to avoid taking responsibility for their actions, leaving others to bear the emotional and psychological weight of the relationship. They may make promises they never intend to keep, or they may engage in toxic behaviors like gaslighting, which further disorients those around them and prevents them from understanding the narcissist's true motivations. Over time, the narcissist's refusal to own up to their faults can erode trust as others come to realize that they are unlikely to ever receive an honest admission of wrongdoing. The narcissist's inability to be accountable often extends to their professional and social life as well. They may take credit for the achievements of others while disregarding the contributions of their colleagues or peers. When something goes wrong, they will often blame others rather than reflecting on their own actions or decisions. In this way, the narcissist can create a toxic environment in both personal and professional contexts, as others are left dealing with the fallout of their behavior. This lack of accountability also inhibits personal growth. The narcissist, by avoiding responsibility, deprives themselves of the opportunity to change, evolve, or mature. True growth comes from the willingness to look at oneself critically, to acknowledge mistakes, and to learn from them. But for the narcissist, growth is not the goal. Maintaining their self-image of perfection is. So they become trapped in a cycle of self-delusion, where every failure is someone else's fault, and every success is solely their own doing. This keeps them locked in a state of arrested development, unable to move beyond their own narcissistic needs. What is often most painful for those around the narcissist is the constant erosion of trust. Trust is built on the foundation of mutual respect and accountability. When one party is unable to take responsibility for their actions, it creates a dynamic where others are left in a constant state of confusion and emotional fatigue. The narcissist's refusal to be accountable for their actions forces those in their lives to question their own perceptions and judgments. Over time, this dynamic can lead to feelings of isolation, as people come to realize that the narcissist cannot and will not be trusted to take ownership of their behavior. This undermines the very fabric of relationships, whether personal or professional, and often leads to broken bonds.